welcome to another exciting adventure on Riding Through the Unknown. I'm your host, Michael, and tonight you guys are in for a huge treat. I have had a conversation with this guest on the phone, and we were like laughing and having fun talking about all kinds of topics. So, you guys just hold on because you're about to go on the best ride ever. And with that being said, I could totally read you the bio for this guest, and I could not even hold a candle up to getting it to come across with everything that she does. So I'm going to turn it over to her to introduce herself. So I give you all the one, the only, super amazing, knowledgeable Valerie Varan.
Oh, Michael, thank you so much. Goodness gracious, I don't even know what to say after that kind of an introduction. Well, just to give viewers, I guess, a little bit of glimpse into some of the things you and I have talked about, and what we're probably going to have fun talking about tonight is, so I'm a lifelong spiritual experiencer, and in the 6th grade, I had my first basically spiritual download after studying atoms that day, and it led me into the field of psychology. So in short, I'll give that kind of a short intro on what I'm about, and then maybe I'll give it a little bit of context. So I right now am a licensed professional counselor. I had a private practice in the Denver area for a long time before I relocated to Florida for certain reasons. And I right now I'm doing some coaching for some people, especially experiencers who want to, get coached into better integrating or understanding their experiences. I also, because the universe seemed to send me all kinds of experiencers, I actually wrote a book for them called Living in a Quantum Reality, using quantum physics and psychology to embrace your higher consciousness. And it's really a self-help book for experiencers. But essentially, the universe is what led me into quantum physics in the first place. And so now I've been called a quantum psychology pioneer. So I don't know if we'll talk about that tonight, but who knows? We're just going to let it fly with all we talk about. So I've just had multiple experiences. And let's face it, anybody who's had any kind of experience out there, whether it's ET related or near death related or spiritual mystical or awakenings or kundalini risings or, whatever, energy sensitive, empaths. Basically, it's a world that gets really minimized in the regular field of psychology, right? So often things are called like, oh, you're hallucinating this, or you have magical thinking, or, these are delusions. And I'm just on a journey to really look at how quantum physics is validating us experiencers. And so we can end up going there if you want, but there's all kinds of places we can go because I basically am trying to bring together so many different fields of study, right? You have the near-death groups and the ET and non-human intelligence groups, and you have remote viewing and spiritual experiences groups, and the list is wide, studying clairvoyance, studying clairsentience, telepathy, all kinds of things. And again, they are unexplained, the whole theme of your show. They are considered outside of the normal. And I'm on a hunt for the science that helps explain it. And some of my clients could care less about that piece of it. They just love feeling validated and love that, someone completely understands where they're coming from and does not think they're crazy. And at the same time, you're going to have those people who are dying to get to the science because they even want to validate it to their own inquiring intellectual mind. So I'll just leave that at that and see where we want to play.
Yeah, and that's very true. And you make a lot of good points. And one of the points, too, is, this being an esoteric disclosure show or series, a lot of what you're talking about is not mainstream. And so people aren't aware of it. And so I love that we're able to sit down and have this conversation and people watch it. And my hope is somebody may overhear someone talking about this and going, oh man, I don't know who to talk to. And somebody will go, oh, I heard this couple on this podcast show talking about just that. You should check it out. And word spreads that way. And I also want to take a second and point out I love one thing that you wrote about your lifelong quest in your bio that I think is important to hear. And I also am curious what got you started on it. And that is your quest to, in your words, unite ancient wisdom with psychology and science to validate and explain the unexplainable.
Yes, I basically that's my whole life theme, really, because I grew up, my folks were Catholic. And so, in a Catholic Christian perspective, they're going to believe in saints or angels or spirits and what have you. But at the same time, as we know, just because someone goes to the Catholic Church doesn't mean they may really believe these things. And if actually anybody ever really started talking about it, they would probably get scared or, say something about it. But I was not finding the answer as a spiritual experiencer, from childhood. I mean, I don't have a before and after, right? There's a lot of people who awaken and there's a dramatic life change between before their spiritual or their near death experience and after. I don't have a before and after. It's just always been the same. And so I basically went through the Catholic Church and then the Bible searching for answers. And then I went through all the Christian traditions. And then I started looking at every world tradition I could get my hands on, including all the esoteric materials and theosophy and, all kinds of things. I call them my blue books. I think I've read every theosophy blue book that was channeled by Alice Bailey from the Tibetan, and, especially in like Cosmic Fire and the esoteric material or esoteric astrology, even like the esoteric material gets deep. So between wandering from Catholic, Christian, all these ancient wisdoms about what are these other realms about? What are these beings about? I was always searching for answers. And as you know, I'm sure the more you search, the more questions you have, because you're just going to keep getting more and more information. But it never, ever addresses how are these experiences possible. And I did not go into psychology first time around. In fact, I'm in my 60s now. So when I was getting started in the late 70s, I remember a lot of us got degrees in business because many of our fathers would say, if you want a job, you better get a degree in business. And so then a lot of us were out there going, well, this doesn't feel spiritual. What do I do with this? And so many people were getting other degrees. I found my way over into the environmental engineering field because for me, as we know, if you feel spiritually connected to the other side, to the planet, to plants, to trees, the crystals, you essentially want to be able to, I'm just trying to figure out how to say this. Like, I guess you're really wanting to go deep down this rabbit hole. You're trying to explain it with some kind of science, and you just kind of have to go down that rabbit hole, if you will. So,
Yeah, and the fun thing about going down the rabbit holes are it's like it's the proverbial joke in life is you get what to where you think is the bottom and you're about to have the aha, I get it, I can solve this. And then you find out you're not at the bottom. It goes a lot, there's a whole nother layer. And then you're like, okay, I'll get to this one and another layer. And so it's like, yeah, it makes me wonder, will we ever truly reach the end of a rabbit hole? And if we did, what would we feel like? Because it's like huh, now that I know, it's like, well, now what? And so I feel like, too many people get stuck on wanting that drive of having the answer to be the first one to solve something, that they forget about all the stuff they had on the journey going down that rabbit hole. And that's where the true life experience is.
I love that you're bringing that up. And I think you and I both realize no, there's never an end to the rabbit hole. And I guess I'll just say that, when I was in the environmental engineering field, talk about no end, you really could start seeing how life is so interconnected that there is never a hard boundary. I mean, even if you think that's a body and then that's another body, you could see the interdependence and the interconnectedness of it all. And that's why our planet is so fragile, right? Because if you go and take out a species or you just come in and bulldoze something away, you're throwing an ecosystem out of balance. So when you're kind of seeing it from that side, and no, there's never an end, and it is the journey. And I know for me that I thought I was going to be in the environmental engineering field for quite a while until it really was the universe kicking my butt. And I'm sure anybody listening knows what it's like when you're on these spiritual journeys and spirit decides to, kick you in a certain direction. The synchronicities get absolutely ridiculous and so obvious. And, I can share as much of that or none of that as we decide. But that's the only reason I went into psychology. And I kind of went into psychology kicking, by the way. So talking about the journey, I went into psychology kicking and screaming, hell no, I won't go, because at the time, this would have been in the mid 1990s. And even then, psychology was still largely like B.F. Skinner behaviorism and, Freud. And I mean, the opinion I had of psychology was not good. It was definitely not going to be anything that was going to be helpful to an experiencer. So why would I want to do that? And yet the synchronicities were ridiculous until I finally surrendered and I said, okay, fine. And so there, talk about the journey again, right? So I'm doing this journey and I see how it leads me. And I'm literally having to take Psych 101 as I'm getting close to 40 years old at the time, because I had not taken anything of psychology. I had studied, I had majored in Spanish and French and business, and I thought I was going to go international because I always loved international. Universe had other plans. So the journeys, when you're on these spiritual journeys, you never know how they're going to go. And then I didn't even know when I opened my private practice, even that was a huge synchronicity, because I didn't think it was time to go into private practice. Again, the universe had other things in mind. And then even when I did open a private practice, I don't even think I put the word energy on my website. At the time, the website was heartlivingspirit.com. I don't think I put the word energy there. And yet all these experiencers and all these people who are energy sensitives were finding me. And I remember at the time, early on this journey down this rabbit hole, I remember saying, kind of like yelling at the universe in a very irreverent way, saying, why on earth are you having me study everything I can about psychology and all the ancient wisdom traditions and even quantum physics? What on earth do they have in common? And in those days, I really could not see what was coming. I could tell that each was a piece of the elephant, but I couldn't really see how they were connected until it started getting over past the year 2000. You get past 2010s, 2015s, and it was becoming more and more and more apparent. And so I just remember kind of falling to my knees at one point in time in gratitude, saying, thanks, universe, I get to do this. Thanks for impulsing me to study all of these diverse things, because obviously the universe knows what they had in common. And I eventually was able to see how they came together. And now I can help people because I'm not just starting that journey. It has been a long journey. And like you said, it's never going to end. We're going to learn something new every day about all of this.
Right. And in full, transparency, like I always do, is we had talked about a topic before we went live, and we seem to be hinting around it and kind of touching on it now. So I think now is a good time to bring that forward. And we both agreed it's an important distinction and an important topic to share with everyone, and that is, we have quantum physics, we have quantum healing, we have quantum, this and quantum that. Everybody's using it as, the new term of the day, and everybody uses it differently. And so, as you mentioned in your intro, being a quantum psychology, pioneer, how and why is the word quantum put into psychology, and how is it used?
And I'm so glad we decided to really, go there because, like you said, it's being used too loosely. So I'm glad that we can have an opportunity to clarify. So first of all, to listeners out there, it's absolutely true. It's being used very loosely. I don't know, what do they use it for? To just say, hey, the new cool thing. It's. I mean, if you put the word in front of toilet paper, quantum toilet paper, it doesn't really mean anything. Now I'm trying to use it very precisely, and so I'm gonna, before I say what it is, let's say what it isn't, because I think that'll be easier for viewers. Right now, regular science is, you're going to hear the word reductionist over and over and over. And what that really means is you are a machine. You're a piece of meat. You are just the sum of your parts, no different from your car. And regular psychology is reflecting that, right? That's why if you have consciousness, then, oh, well, you're aware. They really believe that consciousness is emerging from the brain. They don't know how. No matter how many decades they've been studying this, they still can't say how consciousness emerges from a brain, because every time they poke a brain, they keep finding these, what they call neural correlates of consciousness. Oh, if I, tickle that part, then that squawks. And if I tickle this other part, that squawks differently. And so they're starting to find some things like this, but they can't find anything where consciousness isn't and then it is. And of course, the near-death research even complicates that further. But let me stop there for a moment, right? So they look at us as a machine in regular psychology. We're somehow, mysteriously, your consciousness is emerging from your brain, which means your consciousness cannot survive your death. The implications are profound. No, there is no spiritual realm. No, there can't be any such thing as ghosts. No, you can't have this experience, no matter how much you thought it was mystical and realer than real. No, these are hallucinations or delusions. This is the state of psychology today. It's the state of medicine largely today. So the words that you will hear thrown to describe it are a materialist, physicalist, reductionist paradigm. Now, how do we contrast that? If consciousness is only part of your body, and so even all of your dreams, they're just going to be part of your subconscious, well, you have to go to quantum physics. You can travel to all kinds of other disciplines in science. Nowhere will you find help except for, until, not even in physics, until you get to quantum physics. And it's because at that point in time, the first word, if we just look at one word, it's non-locality. Basically, let me back up. The word quantum first was originated when they used to think energy was very continuous. And then they realized it started coming into these discrete chunks. And the word quantum was just used as a quantum chunk. Quantum means chunk. It just means a discrete little packet of energy. So a discrete little packet of light is called a photon. So that's the basic where the word was birthed. And then looking at the world of the quantum, looking at where now we got deeper into the atom and we started seeing and trying to figure out what's going on with these photons and these subatomic material, subatomic particles and electrons and what have you. And all of a sudden, they were not behaving the way you would expect if you're thinking materialist, reductionist, classical physics, physicality-based reality. It was violating all of that kinds of stuff. And one of them was what Einstein was like, oh, spooky action at a distance. What is that? And that's the word non-locality. So just to give you a distinction, in regular psychology, in regular neuroscience, and even in classical physics or electrical engineering, basically they're looking at energy traveling electromagnetically, right? It's traveling in waves. It has speeds or frequencies. It has, oscillations, frequencies. And it travels in waves, kind of like dolphins, right? And when dolphins are traveling in sync, boy, they really amplify one another. But notice that takes time and space to travel, right? You can calculate it, you can measure it. And that's what they're doing in neuroscience, and that's what they do in regular classical physics and what have you. But notice if all of a sudden, let's say they took one photon, and I'm going to use this lightly. Let's say they took one photon and they put it in London, and they took another sibling photon and put it in California, and they tickled the one in London. The California one starts laughing hysterically at the same time. Wait a minute. That would be impossible to have any kind of at the same time spooky action at a distance, because it can't travel that fast. Like, things can't travel faster than the speed of light. And so it's happening. And we started noticing that part of non-locality, this like it's everywhere at once, connection, interconnectedness, that's the word entanglement. So these pairs, now we say that these pairs are entangled pairs. And it just means their behaviors are now forever correlated. Like they just behave in a correlated. Now, technically, it's in this complementary direction, but we don't have to get that specific. Just know that the behaviors are correlated. So notice if we've had spiritual experiences, if we've had telepathy with people across the world, if we've had experiences of realer than real, seems like other realms or other dimensions, notice if all you really believe in is a visible universe that's just about electromagnetic signaling, you're going to say all of that is magical thinking, it's hocus pocus, you guys are imagining things. But when we've had experiences, we know how real they are. And so we have to use the word quantum. And so for me, when I now say I'm pioneering quantum psychology, I truly am gearing for the day. It's going to be a long journey, but I'm gearing for the day when psychology now includes non-local realms, non-local consciousness, that it already assumes that there is, yes, do we have consciousness that's part of our subconscious? Yes. Do we have neurons communicating with one another using electrical signaling? Yes. But we also have all of this non-local consciousness stuff that's very mysterious and going on. And so for me, quantum psychology includes classical, conventional psychology. None of that goes away. Nobody's work is going to be obsolete. But there's a huge extension that gets put on it. And it now acknowledges the whole realm of the quantum, of this non-local, instantaneous communication that can happen. And maybe I'll leave it there and take it from your intuition, because that, I know that can go so deep down the rabbit hole, but it has to at least include and acknowledge that we are in telepathic communication with everyone and everything all at the same time and instantaneously and infinitely. And there's certain things that we do to shift our consciousness that makes us more likely to experience some of those. And there's other things we do with our consciousness that shuts it down. And so people on the borderline of this are basically starting to notice that the brain acts like a filter of consciousness. So you're taking like consciousness, capital C, this non-local, everywhere, across dimensions, way beyond space-time. And then somehow the brain filters all of that out and just gives you a sense of time, gives you a perception of space, and gives you a perception of a little individual self that is very different from, let's say, self capital S, that's the more non-local across realms.
That's really cool, and I love how you put it. And I actually do have a question about the quantum entanglement theory.
Mm-hmm.
And I use the word theory because I'm not going down the path like they explain it. And my question is, like you say, once you're entangled, you're entangled. And so I hear, of like people being able to sense people far away, that are family or not family, who, may not have even have met. But my question I'm actually going to is a little bit different. Is like you'll see some people who are drawn to megalithic structures or to Antarctica or to spaces on the planet that most people don't think about. Is that a version of quantum entanglement that is drawing them in and drawing them there to for a reason, or is that just their mind got piqued by curiosity and entanglement has nothing to do with it?
So the shortest answer is maybe, maybe not. And let me elaborate. So on one hand, notice that if I'm, let's say, inexplicably drawn to Stonehenge, or, like you said, somewhere, next thing you know, I find myself in Turkey, or, some of these amazing sites, or where a crop circle is about ready to appear, right? And I love Freddie Silva's work, that was distinguishing real from faked crop circles. But anyway, so notice if I'm drawn there, what's going on? There's a number of things possibly happening. It could be that there's something, and again, right now we're looking for vocabulary. So let's just acknowledge to viewers, is this commonly accepted vocabulary yet to apply to psychology? No, the physicists don't want us to go there. Some of them do, some of them don't. The psychology people don't want us to go there. Some of them do, some of them don't. But when you're pioneering something new, when we're heading into a new realm, we need to borrow vocabulary. The human brain is struggling to describe and put experiences into words, and especially anybody who's struggling to understand them scientifically, we're going to go to the science and say, how can I borrow these words? So let's talk about what are some of the words we can use. There's probably 4 or 5 or maybe 6 of the words that might be coming up in this beautiful example that you gave us. So if, let's say, I'm drawn to Stonehenge, what if I literally were part of that group from our historical perspective? We could call it, from our historical perspective, a past life. What I was there. What if I were one of the ritual people doing something there? It could be that now, at the non-local consciousness level, entanglement might very well be involved. That actually makes a lot of sense. I feel like it is a really great hypothesis for us to have. At the same time, let's give another example. What if I'm drawn to Stonehenge and I've never had a past life there. But what if either my journeys in consciousness, my quest of questions and seeking, what if it's taking me in the direction, and Stonehenge is part of my journey and answer? At that point in time, we could call it quantum resonance, because it's happening at the quantum level. It's not electromagnetic resonance where the waves are in sync, but there's a parallel that happens at the quantum level, and it could be like a quantum resonance pulling us together for those kinds of things. I'll leave it at there and see what other examples come up.
No, I love that, because I feel like too many times everybody is like looking for, why am I drawn to this person? Why, and it's always person to person when talking about the quantum, or, describing connections and everything. But nobody gives, in my opinion, I've never really seen where somebody looks at a location and is like, yeah, why are people drawn to certain locations? Some people will say, like in metaphysics, there's a term soul retrieval. You're being drawn to reconnect a piece of yourself from a past, or the land is calling you. Well, how is the land calling you? Is that quantum resonance or quantum entanglement, or what is it that's calling? And could it be a hereditary thing where, like, for example, Ireland, they say if you have Irish ancestry, the island of Ireland is going to call you. And every person I know that I've talked to that's Irish is like, I feel like I got to go to Ireland. It's like it's somewhat ingrained. And so I'm also curious at a level too, is our genetics, is there quantum entanglement and resonance to our ancestors that some people are drawn to and connect to, and other people just are able to turn it off and say, nope, I don't have any interest in that, not going to research that, not even going to acknowledge it, and are able to move on?
Yes, so let's address that, because you brought up a bunch of cool things. So the first thing you said before jumping into the Irish example, just know in research, they've been able to show entanglement in space, entanglement in time, entanglement in frequency. So it's interesting, and other people will say, all right, entanglement is ubiquitous. So it's just interesting, all of these domains that can be entangled, right? Like, isn't it fascinating to think we can be entangled in time, but not necessarily space? Anyway, so now when we think of this great example of Irish heritage, the easiest part of the answer is, yes, some people can turn it off, just like some people who become or grow up clairvoyant and quote, quote, see dead people. I remember being in this energy healing group at one point in time, and one of the clairvoyant people in the class asked the teacher, what? You mean we can turn that off? And the teacher was looking at them like, didn't you know you could turn this off? Like, you can set some energy boundaries around these spirits. Absolutely. And so I think there's a similar phenomenon to, let's say, a place like Ireland that's calling us, and we'll definitely bring in the genetics in a moment, right? So on one hand, we can turn it off. We can take attention and intention and completely change directions. And then attention and intention is very key. Attention is the direction of our focus. Intention is the state of our heart. And we don't have to form it as a thought. The universe knows the state of the heart. We're the ones that form the thought afterwards. So attention and intention. So now let's say Ireland. Why would we be called there? What part of it is genetics? Well, interestingly parallel, we now know that we can pass traumas down from our ancestors 7 generations. That's a little speck of science. At the same time, it's like, why? And how does that work? Well, at a genetics level, we can pass along trauma genes, we'll call them. But isn't it interesting that anywhere along the line, let's say I'm generation 3 and I decide to go to therapy and get some healing, it's fascinating to know that my genes will change in response to my state of consciousness that is now healed. And when I then would decide to have children, my children get my new genes. And that's the field of epigenetics. Probably you've heard of that, and listeners may have heard of epigenetics, which means the kind of like the epi part, the environmental boundary to the gene can make decisions about what to let in and out, let's say, and how to express a gene or not express a gene. And then it's interesting to kind of see how that might evolve over generations, right? So on one hand, sometimes it's regular psychology. Like if I have a really, really, really Irish family, and generation 1 really trains generation 2 what to believe, what to value, what to think, how to pray, how to believe in my leprechauns and my fairies and right? I mean, you can pass along mental sets. And in a way, then they're trained in you like a regular psychology. That wouldn't have anything to do with quantum. But when we haven't been trained and we're wondering, where is this coming from? That can be quantum. Let me give you an odd example. I remember, trying to think of which example I'll give you. Okay. I remember playing around, and who hasn't gone to the whole metaphysical fair, and you want to see what the psychics are going to tell you, and we have fun with that. And several times over the years, I would hear from some psychic, and they would say, and Valerie, you have a grandfather really close to you. Basically, they were trying to give the message that I apparently have some grandfather that really is with me and is one of my key number 1 people. And I'm thinking to myself, not in this life, this person must be wrong. And over time, I kept hearing this over the time, and I'm like, I know it's not these grandfathers. So I was very confused until I got thrust into a past life experience. And I found myself in a Native American body, maybe around the age of 12 or 14. And I'm in that body, I'm running vigorously, and I'm bursting with excitement. And I had been missing my grandfather because the elders had been off on, one of their journeys or hunting trips or something, I guess. And I saw the elders back, and I saw my father, and I saw his headdress, and my grandfather, and as I'm running, I'm literally in this body. Tears are pouring down my face. I am so caught up with emotion. And I'm like, grandfather, I missed you so. And I was the emotion was so intense. Now, why would that be? Why would Valerie be completely caught up into the emotion of that 14-year-old or 12-year-old Indian maiden? And where would that come from? And yet, when I was reflecting upon that, to your point with Ireland, all of a sudden, it was like it opened a doorway, and it opened a realization that is the grandfather that's been with me, who knows how many lifetimes. that even though I grew up in this, Catholic cussing out of the parking lot family, not very religious really, but yeah, there was nothing Native American. There was no influence on Native American at all. And yet, similar to your Irish example, I was always seeking out Native American wisdom. And every time I found it, it was always Lakota. Why? I didn't know one tribe from another, one nation from another. I would no more have known anything, but it was Lakota theme, Lakota theme, Lakota theme, Lakota theme. And it was like, where did that come from? So I think, like you said, that let's say that was an aspect of me that really was that maiden in that lifetime. And that really was a grandfather where we were so, the heart connected us so deeply that we were entangled across space and time. And it stayed with me, and I brought it into this life, and it wouldn't have to have anything to do with genetics. It would only have to do with the state of my consciousness, so seeking spiritual wisdom and so seeking answers from all of the wisdom sources that could fill me with the answers to these thirsty questions. And grandfather was answering the call at his level, and he was leading me to things. And I remember some of my dreams. I remember waking up one morning going, what's a talisman? I'd never heard that word before. At the time of however young I was, I did not know what that word meant. But I was being given this talisman, and I can remember what it looked like. And I can remember this word talisman as I was waking up. And I looked up the word because I'm like, what is that? But there's so many of these things. You're like, how do we explain that? But when maybe we realize maybe we had these parallel or past kinds of lives that are in this Native American, possibly Lakota. I thought it was interesting that I ended up in this life being born in Cheyenne, Wyoming. So it was kind of close to that whole possible situation where I was in. Like I said, we hold things across time. And in our life patterns, I think our interests can be held across time. Like I'll give another past life example of what you're talking about with Ireland. Like I remember one morning waking up, and I really was like, whoa, what was that? Because I had awakened from a dream that I was in the 1800s Frenchman. And I can remember being there. I can remember being in my office. I had like an office and a, kind of old fashioned desk. And there was an old fashioned folder on my desk. And I was that Frenchman who had just awakened that morning with a dream that he was Cornelius Valerius and had written it on this file. And so when I awoke, what was blaring in my psyche was this name, Cornelius Valerius. And it was such a strong emotional imprint that I Googled. I'm like, what? That is specific. Is there such a person named Cornelius Valerius? And there was. He was a 1500s Dutch humanist. And when I tried to find something out about his life, I found out that there are a lot of parallels between, let's say, his essence imprint and mine. And isn't it interesting? I had no reason to study French, but in college, I felt impelled to study French as well as Spanish for various reasons. So, like you said, how many things are these imprints or these quantum non-local interconnectedness, whether we call it entanglement, these things that are linking us together with one. And that's the beauty and the magic of the quantum world. Anything quantum is a collective, and it's all one. That's the beauty of the word. The word is loaded for us experiencers. I better stop there. I went on too long with that answer.
Oh, no, you're perfectly fine. And it actually raised another kind of interesting question for me. And I'm thinking the quantum that we're using might help explain it, but like I have a lot of friends that, I talk about past lives and they're like, well, how do you know you had a past life? And I'm like, well, I have memory, but I can never like validate the memory because not everything is written down word for word and true to form. And so it's like really hard to explain, past lives. And so in the quantum that we're talking about, could the fact of like an example is, being drawn to a lot of Native American stuff, like the artwork, the stories, the legends, the lore, the mythologies. I have no known DNA from Native Americans tribes, but it's like I've studied the Aztecs, Anasazis, Pueblos, all a lot of the tribes all over. So would that be considered past life imprinting, quantum level entangling that has drawn me to that versus, the genetic line, like we're saying, because people argue you can't genetically map the indigenous because they were never coded. But that aside, I'm looking at, the fact of being drawn to a topic that seems contrary to anything in your family lineage. Is that on a quantum level proof you had a past life over there?
Well, the short answer is it proof that we had a past life? I guess scientifically we'd have to say no, it wouldn't constitute proof because the burden of proof is so different scientifically. However, evidence, possibly. So let's look at your example, and let me first introduce the fact for any listeners out there. Ian Stevenson was this professor at University of Virginia. He ended up creating this division of perceptual studies, DPS, I think is what it's called. And Jim Tucker has now continued his work. But they essentially decided to study past lives. And they specifically picked young children, like ages of 2 to 6, 7, 9. Really, they wanted the younger, the better, because they wanted to get them when they had these very specific past life memories that they were talking about. And on average, they would start talking about them around age 2 to 4. And they specifically wanted to take the cases where they didn't have any influence. Like you said, like you, what if like you didn't grow up a Native American anything? I didn't either. But what if we had been talking about these very specific things from these really young ages? People would be scratching their heads going, I can't explain what's going on with Michael, but he keeps talking about this life as Anasazi and, what have you, and giving details. And these children would give details. And so they would pick the cases where they could go back and check. So for instance, and they actually found just as an interesting aside, they found that their birthmarks tended to be correlated with how they died in a past life. An interesting point for psychology, often phobias that were unexplainable in a young child in this life were ended up linking to the way they died in a past life that they were talking about. So let's say, and I won't remember all these facts exactly correctly, but at least it'll give the listeners an essence of the kind of research that's out there. So let's say they're, I think this one kid, like for example, let's say the mom is trying to take this kid to swimming lessons and trying to take him to a pool. And he is this young kid, and he would have an unexplainably phobic reaction every time he would hear someone dive in the pool. And they couldn't figure it out, and it was really huge. So they had a therapist who I guess knew how to responsibly regress him in a hypnotic state where he would then just start going on and on about these past life details. And if I'm remembering this one fairly accurately, it was as if he was in a specific war. I'm almost thinking it was I don't think it was our Civil War. I was thinking it might have even been before that, but let's say it was our Civil War. And they were able to go back, like they would record the session so that they could see when he was in that very relaxed, hypnagogic kind of state. He would be giving these details as this young kid that there were no way he would know these words. And he would, let's say, yeah, my name was this. I was in this regiment. My wife was named this. I had 3 children. And they would go back and look, and they found that there indeed was that name, that person in that regiment with, yes, that wife, and yes, those children. And how did he die? By cannon. And so, right, like, to me, we need quantum to understand how that might be possible that we're carrying that energy from life to life. Now, let's remind viewers, these words, it's always difficult to put this in language because, as a reminder, anytime we're talking about something quantum, it's beyond the rules of space. It's beyond the rules of time. So there is no time in the quantum. It's all one now. And near-death experiencers, spiritual experiencers will tell you that all day long. You know, the past, the present, the future is known all at the same time, which is kind of like a non-locality, kind of like a superposition. That's another word that we borrow from quantum language sometimes, because in the word superposition is, wow, when we started studying subatomic particles and we were expecting them to behave classically, we discovered they weren't behaving classically at all. And they had to kind of invent a new math for what was going on. And essentially, they hold all states at once, and they call that superposition. All possible states at once are held until somehow we measure, and then they call it the collapse of the wave function. What's a wave function? It's math. It's just the math they use back then to study regular waves. And now they're adopting it, and they're trying to figure out these particles and these trajectories. And all of a sudden, it's like, well, that's weird. Somehow when we measure, it's in all states at once, and it's probabilities. And then all of a sudden, it collapses, and it's in one specific state. It's no longer probable all states at once. It's in one state. 100% of the time, somehow when we measure, it goes from all states at once to that. So as an aside, we can point to that in case we talk about it later. That kind of line of thought is used for discussing, does a human consciousness, does an observer play a participatory role in the actual manifestation of our physical universe, right? We can, that's that line of thought. But coming back to, you know, the Native American, to the past lives, to these kids, like, when we are attached to these memories, we're all one. So when we go to the states of the consciousness, we can peer into past, present, and future as if it's all now, because at that quantum level, it is all now. And isn't it interesting that somehow we can just go into these states where we can retrieve that information? Just as a technical point, theories of consciousness that we're now trying to put forth are being called quantum informational theories, because the word quantum is precisely, it's a precise thing, the quantum part. And, you know, it involves non-locality, involves quantum as in discrete units of energy. It involves very specific things like superposition, entanglement, and what have you. But the role of information still hasn't quite been figured out. And that's the new buzzword, right? You have quantum as a new buzzword, and then the new buzzword sliding in right behind it is this information word. So now we might call them quantum informational theories, because information might even be more primitive than quantum. But for right now, let's lump them all together, and it just means it is not behaving classically. It is disobeying every space-time rule we ever had. Anything that was ever Newtonian physics, all of these experiences disobey that. And so no wonder we can tap into past lives. And it might be that from our human brain, when we are thrust into the experience, we might say it's a past life because, like your battlefield ones, let's say, right? You're thrust into the experience. It feels like now, but in your mind, you've been taught in school, there's a linear sense of time. So for you, in the human brain, it feels like past.
Right.
If our consciousness is going to the quantum, it literally might be all at the same time, but let's confuse it even further. It could be it's not even you. Because imagine if we truly are all one at this domain, we're all parts of a larger whole. If there's no real boundary to anything, Michael might have a deep question that the universe wants to somehow, using your language, telepathy, quantum communication, they have you have an experience in answer to your question. I had one of those that involved, I had a question that it didn't even seem to relate to this. Literally, my question was, I was trying to get out this book, and no matter which part of the elephant I was trying to figure out where to start from, I was getting feedback that, like, what, people couldn't understand what I was trying to do. And so somebody wanted to demonstrate their way of doing, hypnotherapy on me. And I definitely would never refer to anybody to a hypnotherapist unless I had tried it, because I would want to responsibly know what they were going to experience. And so this person was like, okay, well, pick a question. And I'm thinking, what question? I don't know. I said, well, why am I having a hard time with this book? What is up? Well, next thing you know, I am thrust into the body. Like, I look down and I have these male, skinny, skeletal, skinny legs, very gray. And as my vision is coming up, I'm on a cross, and I look to my left, and there is Christ. And I'm thrust into such an ecstasy of love that I have no words for. The hypnotherapist, I found out later, became Christian because the series of experiences that I got thrust into during that session were so visceral that I guess it made a huge impact on her. So it kind of went from this body, cross, Christ. It was as if I was telepathically had my gaze go then in this direction, where somehow I'm seeing stones and I'm just knowing this is the tomb where Christ was buried. Then my vision is put to the right, and somehow I'm knowing that St. Paul. Then it's like it pulls me under the ocean, and I'm experiencing everything that St. Paul went through in his life. And I didn't know anything much about St. Paul because, he was that dude that, killed Christians. And I was more Team Christ. I really didn't have any time for St. Paul, so I didn't really know much about him. I literally, after this experience, was driven to go look up St. Paul. And that's how I knew that I was being thrust into visceral experiences of the beheadings, the blindedness, like all these things. So now back to our questions. What are these things? Does that mean that I had a past life as any of these characters? Maybe, maybe not. What if experience is communication? What if when we have this deep wanting to know something, we are given the answer through an experience like that? So I think some of them feel past life, like the Native American one for sure felt like past life for me, and it explained so many things and the grandfather connection and what have you. But I didn't come away with that same feeling in this, let's say, biblical series of experiences. It felt like I was being given a message, if you will. So I think these things that we call past lives can take on different, almost like three different types of things, only one of those being truly a life in our historical past. Does that even at all answer what you were hoping we would address?
It it does, and I'm noticing before I continue, I want to be cognizant of the time and that we're like a minute or two over the hour, and so I didn't know if you had time to continue for a little bit or if you had to go.
I can go as long as you want.
Okay. So, as we're talking about the quantum information, and that reminded me of something I had forgotten when I was a kid, is we called it me floating around, like before I was born. And I would talk to my parents about conversations that happened before I was born. It's like I knew conversations. I could tell them who was present, what was talked about, and there was like, there's no way you could know this. You weren't even conceived yet.
Yep.
How is that explainable? And so I always viewed, like, from the metaphysical terms, well, we choose our parents, so I must have been floating around to decide, is this going to be the right fit of a family or not? But as you're describing these quantum information moments, I wonder, was I tapping in somehow to that quantum field because I didn't know I couldn't, so to
I
speak?
love that. I love that on so many levels. And both could be true, right? So on one hand, imagine that if it's true that before we're incarnate, in between incarnations, we're more like, no wonder we call it orb, because it seems like we're an energy body. It can appear like an orb. And it could be true that as this orb self, you decided to come investigate this group of parents to say, do I want to choose them? That's entirely possible that you were doing that. And that no wonder, because there's an esoteric saying that says, because there is vision, we have an eye, right? Because there are scents, we have a nose. And we know people who are congenitally blind from birth, they have a near-death experience, they see just fine. So we don't need a physical body to see and hear and understand those conversations. We don't need the brain, right? That's the quantum self. And so there is Michael floating in space, probably is like a little orb coming in and deciding to collapse into space-time, localize into space-time, and investigate and then make a decision. That's entirely possible. It's also possible that young Michael, who's having these memories of floating in space, I'm trying to think if I can think of a different alternative from our first orb example. I guess it's possible that you were just tapping into the non-local realm of information when you were a young child about it. I mean, that's possible too.
Yeah, because I mean, it was just like, it would always confuse my parents and my sisters because, like, one great example was we were playing one night biblical trivia, Trivial Pursuit, the biblical version.
Mm-hmm.
And my mom pulls this question, and I'm like maybe at least 6 years old, not quite, teenager yet, probably 6, 8, young. So there's no way I would have this information. But the question was, how many hairs are on a human head? And I sat there for a second, and then I was like, I just smiled and I spit out a number. And we all could not believe that I had guessed the exact number and I got the
That was on
wedge.
the card.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm like, and in my head, when I think about that moment, I'm like, yeah, what 6 or 7 or 8 year old or someone below 10 have and retain that knowledge or heard it?
And
So
even that,
where, yeah.
And even that, we have several possible explanations. On one hand, you could be telepathically getting the information from the person who's looking the answer on the back of the card. Right? That's one option. You could be telepathically knowing the number because they're looking at the number. It's also possible that from a spiritual being, a guardian angel, some being that's part of your sphere is telepathically communicating to you, letting you know what the number is you're supposed to say. That's also a possibility. It's also a third possibility that you are tapping into just a broader quantum informational realm and somehow pulling out the right number. All of those are possible.
And I mean, it kind of explains so much because I always felt different growing up and having information that I shouldn't have. And I used to describe it sometimes as going, I feel like I'm from the future, returned to the past, living now to a certain point. And then it was like I reached a certain point in my life where I was like, I no longer knew what was coming next. And so I felt like, why is the information stopped? And then the other question would be was I really from the future returned to the past, or did I somehow tap into future knowledge? And for some reason, the timelines that we doing, what we're doing, I altered so many things by altering choices that future self, so to speak, that I was drawing from ceased to exist.
I would say, right, like all of these things are possible. So what could we say about that? We could say that, remember, at the quantum level, it is all now. So it could just be that, and at the quantum level, we can be in way more than one place at a time. So forget bilocating. We can trilocate, and I don't even know how to say the numbers after that, but we could be in 1,000 places at one time. So on one hand, it's possible that when you were busy floating in space and being in the non-local realm that we often call the spiritual realm, it's possible that you retained those memories in the womb at your first birth. That's why you were remembering all of that and could have been hovering, and you retained all of that knowledge and you retained your non-local knowledge. And even Ian Stevenson and Jim Tucker noticed that the kids would start forgetting around ages like 6, 7, 8, 9, largely because most of them aren't lucky to have supportive parents. Most kids are going to be told, no, you don't really have an invisible friend. No, you're making it up. No, it's your imagination. No, what are you talking about? You're just imagining that. And there seems to be such that kind of brainwashing, brain shifting training going on that a person loses their memory and it gets distorted, so they don't really know. So now they discount it, and so now they shove it aside and they forget it. It is possible. It is possible because if we think at the quantum informational level, everything is co-participatory. Nothing is ever set in stone, right? So notice that most psychics that try to give a prophecy, I remember MIT quantum physicist Claude Swanson, who wrote the book Life Force, the what was it called? Life Force, the scientific explanation. I think he also wrote a book about like explaining the paranormal or something like that. And I remember him saying, it's not that those prophecies are usually wrong, it's the timeline that's usually wrong. And doesn't it make sense if at the quantum level, it's all dynamic and we're all influencing it all in the now, so there is no way to pinpoint it. Kind of like in quantum physics, there's something called like complementary and uncertainty. So basically you can't know these two complementary things at the same time, right? You can't know it location and a momentum at the same time. They're just two complementary things that you can't know at the same time. So the future might be like that, where because we're constantly co-creating, we might glimpse and intuit at a non-local level a possible something that's high probability in the quantum realm, a high probability future that we experience, and then we say it as a prophecy. But if everybody now hears that prophecy and starts changing what they're doing, now that probable future could shrink and another probable future amplify in probability. And again, at the quantum information level, really, that's all at one now anyway. So.
Yeah, and I like that. And it's just, to me, it's like I had a feeling of being lost because it was like I had no what's next coming, because it was like it totally just like stopped, and it was just like it's like waking up and feeling like I don't know what to do because there's no direction. And so and it just was a weird feeling to get used to, because when you're for me it was like my teenage years and my 20s to mid 30s, everything, it's like I had a sense of what was coming, so I knew how to react, what to react to. And then to wake up one day and be like blank, it's like I had, it's like I didn't know what happened. It's like, and you're left with the feeling of, did I do it right this time? Or did I mess it up even worse? And now I'm like, I just erased something that shouldn't have been erased, because it's like a void feeling.
Well, and my heart goes out to that little kid, because how I can just feel the pain of feeling like you did something wrong, or like you erased something, or you changed the future. And was that kind of like in the whole Back to the Future when he started changing things for the bad? Like I can imagine how scary that could be. And at the same time, I'm feeling called to say to you, no, it had nothing to do with that. Notice when we awake from a dream, it's very vivid upon first awakening, and then it clearly fades as this consciousness focuses on this space-time location. And when you really look at what we're learning in this vast realm of experiences and the kinds, and what do we have in common, the forgetting is in common. And when you look at even across the spiritual traditions, there's various explanations of why is it we forget, and people will have different answers to that question. But what if we are so blessed with free will, and it's really about, what if the most important task at our hand is co-creating, and co-creating consciously and co-creating with free will? And wouldn't that be beautiful if, just because we had a glimpse of something, or we carry our imprints into this life that are affecting us, wouldn't it be beautiful to say that, wow, but we got to really focus here and now in this very particular point and we got to make new choices, and we got to choose experiences, and we got to choose and experiment with our effects on everything and everyone. And I think I'm feeling called to say that to you. Like, you're in a beautiful time where you get to create. And so I love, even in these interviews, that you let everybody know you just want it to flow intuitively. And what if all of us lived our life that way?
Yeah, thank you. And that's very true. And that is kind of where I've kind of landed into. And maybe that's the moment I needed in my mid to late 30s to be able to do what I'm doing now in my 40s. Was it's like the proverbial letting go to make new. And so I just had to process through it, and that's just the only way the body knew to make it to where my consciousness and subconscious and every level would go, okay, we're now in sync. We're leaving this to go for this.
And notice, if that weren't the case, you'd probably start feeling like a puppet as you got older, right? If you had some sense that the future was fixed and that you were here to enact the future, you would probably start feeling resentful like a puppet. And how beautiful that you don't have to feel that way, that you can venture into the unknown, because venturing into the unknown is like venturing into the quantum field of potentiality, where all possible states exist, and we get to choose, what do we want to manifest? And, yes, we are co-creating with everyone else, but how beautiful that we can actually hear a dance of we-ness, right? Even like this beautiful conversation that we get to have tonight, you and I, we get to have this dance purely intuitively, like we're just showing up real and seeing where it takes us. And isn't that beautiful? And isn't that what is meant by even the Christian teachings of, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven? Or isn't that exactly what's like when we say, as above, so below, and let me create, right? Like we're all creators, and we're all co-participating on creating a reality that's all in the now. I probably would hate for us to stop without me sharing this pixel reality experience that I had, because I think it's so relevant to what we're talking about. At the time, I was quite confused. I woke up, I was at my in-laws. I was there to be the one in charge of making turkey dinner for Thanksgiving. And yet I had awakened from such a vivid other reality kind of dream that I literally had to sit on the couch for a while to process what was going on and kind of come to, if you will. It's like, whoa. And in that dream, realer than real, I don't remember seeing a body at all, but I was in a very pixelated reality. So kind of think Times Square at night or Hong Kong at night, where you see all this neon, but it was pixelated. Everything was pixeled. And I couldn't see, but I could feel the presence of a spiritual being. And I telepathically was receiving the communication that said, go back and tell them that everything they're doing in any reality is affecting the all of us in the now, in all realities. And I'm waking up thinking, who am I supposed to tell that to? It really, I had to think about that for a while. And at the time, part of the synchronicity is, as I'm digesting this message and thinking, who am I supposed to tell this to? And what are they talking about? I look to my left, and Mark Zuckerberg's face is staring back at me from a magazine. So I felt synchronistically inclined to pick up the magazine. And I'm like, okay, what is this link? And I open it up and he's announcing Oculus Rift and he's talking about VR and AR and blah, blah, blah. And I'm thinking to myself, who am I supposed to tell? I've literally never even played a video game. And for some reason, being in the pixelated reality, at the time, I was like, are you trying to tell me that when my husband is playing zombie games, because he's playing these video games, like, are you wanting me to tell him that, no, you really are killing, even though they're zombies, like, no, you're killing. And it's affecting us all in the now, in all realities. Like, I was like, what do I do with this information? Who do I tell? But as the dream became more known and I allowed the information non-locally to really penetrate my being, I've realized how profound the message is, and it does apply to video games, but it applies to each of us and everything we're doing every minute. And at every level, imagine that we are really truly living multiple lives at the same time. And, you know, there are multiverse theories in the quantum realm. And imagine that we really are, every choice we make is that important. Because every choice we make and every thought we think, it's not just what we do, it is what we think. It carries an energy, which is space-time, but it goes in the quantum and it's non-local. And it's our contribution to this non-local consciousness. And when you take the whole pot together, this big old, you know, Sunday dinner potluck thing going on, there's a lot of contributions going on. And they're all affecting the all of us, all in the now. And so, yes, there's free will, right? We can choose what we're going to do with the circumstances that we have, but we're all in this together. So we might not choose every circumstance to be in, but we can choose in the now how we're going to respond to every circumstance that we're in. And in that way, we refine our very nature through fire, right? The fire of experience, the fire of consciousness. I better stop there.
No, that's a very good point, and it actually got me thinking about something, and I'm curious your thoughts on is on a quantum level, as we're saying, you know, there are multiple timelines running all at the same time. And so by the choices we make, it seems like these timelines are interweaving, and that could be why we have the Mandela effects, the deja vus, is because aspects of each timeline is carried with us as we jump timelines, and it just seems seamless because on a quantum level it is, because as you pointed out, past, present, future are all in one singularity.
It's like we're looking from the top of the mountain, and instead of just seeing, you know, that location, that and that from the top of the mountain, we're looking here and it looks like the past. We're looking here and it looks like the future. It's like we can see them all in one view.
Right. And so that's why choice is such the most powerful weapon, so to speak, that we have in our arsenal, is because that's what allows us to jump the timelines and evade things or change things that, you know, may not be working for us so fast. And we call it universe working in our favor, or tapping into the universal source field. Could it be actually becoming aware of the quantum field and learning to navigate it?
Yes. And at the same time, I'm feeling called to kind of remind viewers that doesn't it make sense, right? If it, here, Michael, you and I are talking about what non-local consciousness can possibly hold, the playground, and how big it can possibly be, and how confusing it could be potentially in our limited human brain. And so, doesn't it make sense now, giving a little bit of appreciation to classical physics and classical neuroscience and classical psychology? Doesn't it make sense that the brain literally might be meant to be a filter, and not everyone is ready to handle non-local experiences? And it might be that's why they're not ready. And ones who, and I'll just say this, speaking as a transpersonal psychotherapist from the past, right? Like a lot of people are like, they want to minimize, let's say, the use of pot, or, everybody now is talking about psychedelics and what have you. But I can tell you from experience that people who are using these and they are not ready to handle it, they really can succumb to psychosis. And we are now finding that even something like, everybody's like, oh, pot, it's nothing. Well, number one, the pot that was around when I was young is not the pot today, but we can see this trajectory that's happening, and it's as if we're breaking the hardware. And so while we can have non-local experiences that do not mean we're quote, quote, going crazy, these aren't psychosis. But psychosis can still happen because if someone doesn't know which timeline they're on, if somebody doesn't know how to navigate reality and how to be here in this one now at will, then they can really succumb to some serious psychosis and dysfunction that truly might be something like schizophrenia or other things. So we just want to, I think, feel. And I know someone was telling me lately, like they had really studied the depth of the shaman who were introducing ayahuasca, and one of those really key people were saying ayahuasca was never meant for everyone, and it was only meant to be used one time in the most extreme spiritual emergencies. And now we're using it as like tourism. So it's just not everyone is ready. And quite frankly, coming at it from my perspective and with my clients, I want everybody to know, just like for sure, that you don't need any substances to have access to this. Attention and intention is the key. And so everyone can learn when they are ready how to navigate this and learn it through a meditative type of procedure, right? But so many people want to take the shortcuts and use psychedelics to do it. But everybody also needs to know, and if you're not ready, and if you use it too much or too chronically, you could literally break your hardware and succumb to psychosis. So like you said, our choices are really important. And I think all of us, even if we decide that we're going to use psychedelics to experience a non-local reality, ultimately we're intended to do it consciously and not need psychedelics. And unfortunately, a lot of people who will use them then believe they need them. And so then it's kind of, now they're going backwards because now they just believe they need them. Instead of like you can access this at whatever time.
All right, and real quick, because I know it's getting late, is something that I've been witnessing, and I'm thinking the viewers might get something out of, is relationships. We see friendships, loved ones, marriages. You're going along and everything's great, and then all of a suddenly not great, and there's no answer why, and then like you may come back to it or may not. Could that be explained by one or both parties, their timelines, they jumped without realizing they jumped, and the new timelines are not congruent with each other? So the relationships fall apart unexpectedly, unexplainably, and learned what they needed to learn so they're never brought back together, or learned what they needed to learn and then come back together because now they're in the new spot and decide, okay, yeah, we missed, we want, so they reunite and their timelines cross again. Could that help explain that phenomenon and kind of bring peace of mind to people who are sitting there wondering what happened, what went wrong, or what didn't go wrong? Or
What a beautiful question. I'm glad you're bringing that up. Everything that you said is a possibility. It's also a possibility, and this is probably more common, that, and this is a true quantum psychology perspective that, has all the regular and the quantum and looks at it with a large lens. Notice that most people aren't having that many or ever feeling like they've ever had a non-local consciousness experience. And these problems happen. So imagine that we're here and we haven't remembered, we haven't awakened to that. And we're kind of stuck with this human ego, meaning like there's nothing wrong with an ego. We need to develop an ego before we're ready to transcend the ego, because the ego is the body for the soul. So the ego is necessary. But notice that if we neglect to build and grow our ego, if we neglect what we bring to the table, we neglect our skills and honing our skills and our capacities and what have you, and we're kind of just shirking off. Well, notice that we might resonate, an energy resonance and a quantum resonance way, resonate with that which is in the same circle with we are, nothing to do with different timelines. It's just from a where we are in consciousness standpoint, we are brought together. And most commonly, if people get married really, really young, look at how much we can change between the ages of 20 and 30, for example. So a lot of times I kind of keep wishing people wouldn't even get married to 30, because that's when they finally start growing up and really understanding who they are nowadays. And they're more likely to choose partners that really match who they are more often, rather than they weren't really stepping up to the plate, so to speak, before. And so, it literally could be as simple as that. So the more readily someone steps into knowing who they really are and actually being their authentic self in life, the more they will attract a similar mate, and the more sustainable that will be. The more they decide to just do what everybody else is doing and just kind of join in and do what everybody else is doing, the more they are not themselves, the more they're just kind of almost randomly being with people, and the more likely they are to grow out of that. So I feel like more often than not, it's about resonance. And if one grows faster than the other, we should never, ever fault ourselves for that. It just is what it is, right? If we grow faster than our partner, or a partner grows faster than us, it is what it is. How sad that we have to succumb to blame and shame and those games.
no, I think that's beautiful. And I think, people witnessing like life and question, maybe going through that, I think that'll help them out. And so thank you for that. And thank you for, trusting me to come on and be a guest on my show as well, because I know from my personal experience and experience of talking with friends that you don't always know what's going to happen when you come on, and what the show host could do. So thank you for trusting me.
Absolutely. You have a beautiful, trustworthy energy. So thanks for having me. I'm delighted to come on your show anytime you want to have a conversation.
Well, thank you. And for those who may be interested in your book and everything, could you share with them about that and promote it?
Oh, that's sweet of you. Thanks. So it's called Living in a Quantum Reality. This happens to be available at Amazon or any book retailers, if you will, that you can order your books online from. And it really is a self help book for experiencers. If you're really wanting to know what do I have in common with other experiencers, and especially the things in common that are causing me angst or depression or dark nights or any of those kinds of things, there's a lot of self-help in there. And in the first chapter, I do kind of introduce people in a very soft way to some of these energy terms and quantum terms, but just in the first chapter, just a little bit, just get your toes wet. And in the second chapter, it's kind of like seeing ourselves in this big, energetic, more non-local way. And then all the rest of the chapters are just literally self-help kinds of chapters. So I am working on a book now to go a little bit deeper dive. I'm working on a book with Doug Matsky, a quantum engineer, and we're hoping to kind of really take quantum psychology in a much deeper direction. And more people have been reaching out later about me, doing a quantum psychology course for other therapists and what have you. So all of those are probably in the making. So thanks for letting me share that.
Well, thank you. And before I cut us loose and wrap this up, I want to take a moment and share a message for you, Valerie, and that is from the heart of myself and my show to you. Thank you for what you're doing for humanity.
Oh, thank you, Michael, so much. Blessings.
Yes, it is seen.
Thank you.
And with that, I'm going to say goodnight to everyone. Thank you all for watching. And if you enjoyed this episode, please click the like button, leave a comment. I will respond when I see them. And make sure you follow along because you never know when Valerie will make another appearance on the show.
And I do have my valerievaran.com site. So if anybody wants to check into different information, they can.
Yes, that link is in the description, I believe. So thank you so much. And thank you to everyone. And with that, we are going to call it a night and have a wonderful evening and rest of the week. Good night, everyone.
Good night, everyone.